There's a tale I always considered to be just an urban legend, more from my neighborhood than my family, which had nearly faded from my memory until now. After my parents passed away and my older siblings left, I guess it was never shared again. No one told it, at least not to my family. I had almost completely forgotten about it. Now I am the one living in the house where I grew up. It was left to me, and here I have started my own family and am raising my daughter. The neighborhood has changed a lot, seriously. If my siblings ever returned from the United States, I think they wouldn't recognize it. But we are happy here. These days we have to be careful of the crime that didn't exist 35 or 40 years ago. But we are happy. My daughter is 16 years old and just recently started dating a boy. Well, she just told us about him. Her boyfriend is a good kid, Julian, very fond of soccer, so I don't mind too much that he's always around on weekends. I had someone to watch the matches with for the first time since I was a kid. So we get along well, and yes, he seems like a good boy. I guess I missed having a son, and he lost his dad 2 years ago, a good formula for us to get along, I suppose. Recently, he had a match, a rapid soccer tournament at some fields not too far from here, up the neighborhood. The neighborhoods organized it, so it would end quite late at night. Julian asked me to come watch if I got the chance, but the truth is I was busy all that Saturday. Around 9 p.m., I asked my daughter if she had heard how it went. She said they had lost in the semifinals, but Julian and a friend would stay at the fields to watch the final at 10. It was about to start, and that's all Julian had messaged her. My daughter was getting ahead on her homework. I went into my room and turned on a soccer analysis and discussion program, but just as background noise while I tried to read. The arguments between the presenters lulled me to sleep, and I fell asleep with my book in hand. I don't know at what point between dreams I started to hear the altered voices of my daughter and my wife, then Julian's, and another kid I didn't recognize. I was so asleep that those voices mingled in my dreams until my daughter woke me up and shook me hard to do so. When I opened my eyes, I saw her very frightened. She said something had happened to Julian, that I should go quickly, that Julian didn't want to tell her what had happened. I thought the worst, a fight or a violent robbery. By the look on that poor boy's face and his friends, both completely pale, I knew something was truly wrong. "Tell him, at least tell my dad what happened to you, please," my daughter said. But neither Julian nor the other boy dared to say a word. They looked very affected, as if that night was going to change their lives forever. They only said they had to go and apologized for coming to our home so late, but they didn't know what to do, where else to go, that they would go home, that surely their families were worried about them. I put on my shoes and told them I would drive them in my car, not to worry. They only resisted a little, out of obligation. Deep down, I think they were tired and didn't want to walk anymore. My daughter wanted to go, but I told her no, and that I would try to get them to tell me what had happened. As soon as we got into the car, as if it were their cue, the two boys started to cry. Somehow they had held back all that feeling for the shame of crying in front of my wife and daughter. When they calmed down, they told me what happened. In the middle of the final match, things started to get tense. First, the stands were filled with casual spectators and families, but then groups of dangerous-looking young men, friends of one of the teams playing, began to arrive. Meanwhile, from the other side of the fields, another group of people started approaching, apparently a team that had lost in the semifinals. They were, as it turned out, rival gangs. And it was clear that something was about to happen. Julian and his friend realized how people started noticing. People began to leave, and men who had brought their kids walked away without saying anything. The two of them still didn't know why, until one of the referees, a man who knew them, discreetly told them to get away from there as soon as possible, that it was going to get dangerous at any moment. When they left the fields, they saw another large group of people approaching from one of the streets, carrying baseball bats and stones in their hands. So they turned around and started to walk down through the alleys and passageways that crossed the neighborhood blocks from the fields to the boulevard. They had never gone down that way before. They knew it was dangerous. But at that moment, it seemed a safer option than passing near any of those gangs and being mistaken for them. They started running when they heard voices behind them, as if someone had seen them. Halfway down an alley, they jumped over a drunk, a person who seemed to be asleep, sprawled across part of the passage. They continued running, going down at full speed when they realized that a few meters ahead, there was another person also sprawled out. They jumped over him, and again, a few meters ahead, they noticed another person, exactly in the same position. They were so confused they stopped completely, and Julian's friend asked if they had already passed that way. "Of course not," Julian replied. "It's not the same person." "Yes, it is," his friend said. "How many drunks around here do you know that wear red shoes?" When he said that, Julian looked at that detail, something he had missed until then. His friend was right, that person lying there had red shoes. They looked back up, and despite the darkness, they noticed that no one was sprawled in the middle of the alley they had just come down. "We have to keep going, we have to get down," said Julian, and they started running again. They jumped over that man on the ground who, for the first time, said something, a few words they couldn't understand. They kept running as hard as their knees could handle, and a block down, Julian's friend looked back at Julian, screamed, and told him to run and not look back. He ran as fast as he could, trying to keep up, but it was useless. He started to fall behind. He had never seen his friend run that fast, and as he was running, when his friend was getting further away, he heard something else. Other steps. Very peculiar steps, like hard shoes running very close behind him. When he turned around, wishing it was all a dream, wishing what he was seeing wasn't real, a step behind him, running after him, was a clown. A man with smeared clown makeup, wearing torn checkered pants and a wool jacket that barely let him move his arms. That clown had his gaze fixed on Julian's friend, but noticing Julian's stare, he turned towards him and lunged as if to catch him in his arms. Julian screamed and threw himself to the ground to dodge him, but as soon as he fell and turned to see where the clown was, there was nothing. No one was there. He got up and continued running. From below, already far behind, his friend yelled for him not to stop, warning him that it was still chasing him. Julian turned and saw the man, the clown, running towards him, but many meters back, exactly where they had last jumped over him. When they emerged from that maze of alleys, their only thought was to run to our house. We were the only people they knew there, and what they had just witnessed was so bizarre, so unbelievable, that they hesitated to speak of it. They eventually told me, feeling they had nothing left to lose. I tried to calm them, telling them it was nothing, likely just a prank. I left them at Julian's friend's house and went back home. It was during that journey that I remembered the story, the urban legend I had often heard as a child, the encounter my dad had experienced, who swore it was not merely a neighborhood tale. My father once told us about a time he was with one of his friends at the top of the neighborhood. He made sure to head back before midnight to avoid encountering anything strange in the alley. He passed through without any incident until he reached a crossing where another narrow alley intersected his path perpendicularly. As he approached the crossing, someone turned to face my father. It was a man wearing clown makeup who, without slowing down, almost collided with him. My dad dodged him, and the man continued hurriedly, clutching his stomach. When my dad recounted this encounter to some neighbors, they told him that it wasn't just any person he had seen, at least not any living person. They then shared with him the story of a poor man who worked as a clown, performing magic tricks on the street for some coins in the historic center. He always returned home late to the upper part of the neighborhood and invariably took that alley. One night, after a successful day of work, he was heading home when he encountered some thugs in that area. Back then, such encounters were rare. They demanded money, and he complied, not wanting any trouble. However, when they noticed he had more, they demanded everything he had. Knowing he couldn't refuse without risking harm, he handed over the money. Just as he was about to leave, they heard voices approaching down the alley. The thugs, fearing he might get help before they could escape, decided to incapacitate him. Without warning, to prevent him from calling out for help, they stabbed him in the stomach. That poor clown tried to seek help but didn't get far. He collapsed in the middle of the alley. Passers-by stepped over him, dismissing him as just another drunk who had fallen asleep on his way home, until dawn broke and someone finally noticed the pool of blood. Then they realized it was something far more serious than they had ignored. Years later, one of the murderers, drunk and full of remorse, confessed the entire story at a neighborhood bar, how they had killed that clown in the alley, but no one reported him to the police. No one took action, and since then, every so often, an unfortunate soul walking at night in the alley encounters that ghost, that lingering spirit, that poor clown. That's the story my father told me, a forgotten legend, one I only heard from him and within our family, never from a neighbor. I always thought it was a tale made up to keep my siblings and I away from that place late at night, but 3 decades later, I hear it again. 3 decades later, I finally believe in that encounter my dad had. Thank you all for listening to my story. I live in a very large house with my in-laws due to financial circumstances that prevent my wife, my daughter, and me from living separately. However, the houses here are very large, so we live quite comfortably. The properties are huge and the houses are not too close to each other. We live in a somewhat rural area, surrounded by many trees, and an area that looks like a forest. There's hardly any light. If you go out at night without a lamp, it's like stepping into the wolf's mouth. You can't see anything at all. I am Mexican and my wife is Romanian, and I believe in everything. Spirits, ghosts, God, Jesus Christ, the Virgin, La Llorona. I believe in everything. But my wife has always told me that those are Mexican traditions, that none of that exists here, that there are stories for children but not to come to her with those things because they don't happen here. After living here for 6 years, I had put that aside, and they were just some beliefs from my folklore, these traditions that I remembered fondly, certain tastes that I acquired when I was young and a teenager, but they were fading away. Just 4 weeks ago, I was going to the kitchen for a glass of water and passed by my daughter's room when I heard a voice I had never heard before, and it wasn't my daughter's voice. My daughter started talking back to the voice, so I opened the door because I thought maybe a little neighbor girl was there talking to her, but it was very strange because my wife hadn't told me someone was coming. Nobody had warned me we had visitors, and in Romania, people tend to be very proper in manners. I opened the door, peeked inside, and my daughter was sound asleep. The fact that no one else was there scared me, but I also thought I was tired. It had been a hard week at work, and I might have been imagining things. I closed the door and in the morning talked to my wife. She dismissed me, thinking I must have been imagining things. A few days passed and I heard the voice again, and this time my daughter was the one talking and waiting for this voice to respond. Then I began to approach the door closely, and when I grabbed the knob, my daughter said, "Go away, my dad is about to come in. I'm going to pretend to be asleep." That's when I understood that she was indeed talking to something the day before. I opened the door and again my daughter was pretending to be asleep. I didn't want to disturb her, so left. After that, I talked very seriously with my wife about this, and she said, "What time did you go to her room?" I said it was around midnight, 2 in the morning, something like that. It was very late. To which she responded, "What neighbor's child would be outside in this cold?" That's when I realized it was true. It's extremely cold outside, and no neighbor would allow their girls to be here without us knowing. It doesn't make any sense. It's not possible that the girl would come from another house in the middle of the night. It's completely atypical. I told my wife what was happening, and she said, "Stop with your things, you're making things up," and again dismissed me as if I was crazy. There's no way it's a neighbor. From that day, I began to pay attention to what was happening to my daughter, and started to watch and peek at her without her realizing. And one day I said to her, "Hey, do you have an imaginary friend? Who are you talking to?" I saw her get very nervous, really nervous, and just from chatting normally, her lips turned white and she shut down the conversation. That was strange. Why is she scared? Why is she nervous? From the day I asked her, the following weeks were horrific. My daughter would wake up in the middle of the night screaming, saying things like, "Please leave me alone, get out of here." And in the morning, when I asked her about her dreams, or even in the middle of the night when I entered the room to check on her, after hearing her scream, she wouldn't remember been having those nightmares. I thought, something really bad is happening here. So fast forward to 2 days ago, I went out to chop wood because here the winters are severe, and my brother-in-law, my father-in-law, and I take turns bringing it in at night to keep the house well heated. As I was going out, I noticed that my daughter was looking outside through the window, and when I turned to the window, there was a reflection in the window of another girl who was not my daughter. Then I ran to my daughter's room and saw my daughter get scared, go and get into her bed, and pretend to be asleep, and then behind me, I heard a children's laugh. It chilled me to the bone. It was a very low temperature, and there was no way a child could be out there. I ran back out to get the wood because we needed to bring it. It was important. And when I got to the shed where we keep it, I started to hear several children's giggles. To this day, I've told my wife that these aren't just my ideas. I went through something that completely changed my perception of the spiritual realm. Due to life's twists and turns, I got my girlfriend pregnant, and we found ourselves in a tough situation. I had a group of very spiritual friends. They didn't follow a specific religion but would gather for spiritual sessions. I, on the other hand, never took part in these meetings. Coming from a family that wasn't focused on spirituality or religion, I was never interested in that stuff. My girlfriend comes from a very puritanical Christian family, which sometimes made it difficult for me to get along with them. Due to circumstances, I had to move to my girlfriend's relative's city because I needed a job and a home, something we couldn't get in our place of residence. When I said goodbye, that group of friends gave me several gifts that I didn't even have the chance to open and just took with me. When we got to the new house, my girlfriend's family said that the house felt strange, very cold, and even though we were all together in the dining room, there were very uncomfortable silences. I tried to be grateful and understanding of the situation, although those uncomfortable silences filled the atmosphere with fear, as if we were all threatened, but couldn't discuss it. One day, my wife started telling me that she had strange dreams, seeing something that entered the room, something that crawled with red eyes and a long tongue and said it wanted our baby. I tried to convince her that it was just fear due to the changes we were going through, but she insisted it was something more. The house had never felt like that before. There was something there. She went with her family to seek a pastor to talk about this. On my own, I focused on finding a job and tried to forget these issues. But one full moon night, the moonlight entered the room and we both felt a strange energy that filled us with terrible fear. She said she felt there was something under the bed. When I looked, I briefly saw red eyes and something with a long tongue that quickly hid in the darkness. I ran to talk to her uncles, and in a family meeting, we decided to seek external help. We went to see a pastor who seemed knowledgeable about these matters. He told me it had to do with me. At first, I didn't understand. I don't wear jewelry or anything similar, but then I remembered the gifts from my friends. Among them, we found a very nice watch with peculiar decorations and a lot of detail. The pastor said we should leave it there, that it would stop what was happening in the house, but he warned that my wife would continue to be attacked by dreams. Since we left the watch with the pastor, everything calmed down in the house. A week later, the pastor contacted us and explained that a pact with some type of demon had been made, and our baby had been offered in exchange. I don't know what kind of people I was dealing with before, but clearly they were not friends.